New World is an MMO like no other MMO. Amazing action combat, stunning visuals, brilliant sound design, and a unique class system, and much more. But one phrase always springs to my mind when I think about the game, and that is wasted potential. Let me explain why. New World launched in September 2021, and the problem started straight away. The game suffered from the usual queue and login issues that many MMOs do, but we also had some technical issues. There were gold dupes, invincibility bugs, insanely laggy wars, giant sausages in chat, and more. But I don't think the technical issues at the time were actually the main deal breaker for most people. No, I think it was the actual content that was the biggest problem. The leveling was boring and repetitive, and the end game loop was just bad. For many months, the end game consisted of doing nothing but chest runs. You had to pay to enter dungeons, so instead of doing that, players just went to the elite areas on the map and raided all of the elite chests every day. Now this would raise up a hidden gear score which controlled the level of your gear drops. And well, I won't explain everything here, but it was truly an awful system. They did make it better over time. They eventually made it so it was more visible, and they made dungeons free to enter. But for a lot of people, the die was cast. It was just this simple. Leveling was slow and uninteresting, and then once you got to the end game, well, the end game lacked depth and content. That sealed its fate for so many people. But even with this and all the issues that New World had, for a lot of people, New World was somewhat special. It just had something unique and different. Sure, the graphics were top notch, probably best in class, and sure, the sound design is exquisite. On top of that, we had a fantastic class system which was very fresh. There is no class system, in fact. You just pick 2 weapons and then you pick your armor rating, light, medium or heavy. However, it was none of that which made New World truly special. It was the combat. The combat in New World is like no other. Its action combat is by far the best in an MMO, in my opinion. Sure, there are other action combat MMOs, but they either hadn't lasted long or they're pretty much incredibly niche. New World features true action combat, like proper action combat in an MMO. You have to aim your bow, dodge out of attacks, block incoming damage, left click to attack, and if the enemies are out of range, well then you don't hit. It's energetic, it's fluid, it's enjoyable, it feels fresh, it's different, and it's unique. But obviously, it's not perfect. I think it truly shines in PvP, and even then it can be annoying with some combat desync. And while the combat does function in PvE, it can be at sometimes frustrating. Attacks will sometimes hit you if you're behind a target because they're swinging in a massive arc. Stray arrows in an M3 can just one-shot you. Animation locks can make movement mechanics awkward. And there's other things that make it not perfect. But honestly, it's the best I've ever played in an MMO. Now, not everybody will agree with this. I think Lazy Peon said combat could use some improvement. And while that's always true, the combat is really the thing that sets this game apart from all others. It's truly something different, special, and sometimes fantastic. So anyway, we had the launch issues, but some people like myself stuck with it because of the combat. And as time went on, the game got better. We had content being added, we had system changes and updates, and by the time we got our first proper massive content patch, the game felt like things were turning around. Brimstone Sands was a massive update that came approximately 1 year after the launch of the game. It was effectively a free expansion. It had a new zone, new dungeon, new heart rune abilities, and more. And on top of that, it was free. It was then followed up by fresh servers. Because they had reworked the leveling experience from 1 to 25 and made the rest of the leveling easier, they decided to do fresh servers so people could experience that. And things overall, I think, started to feel a little bit positive in the community. However, looking back now, I think that this is when the problems truly started. We just didn't know it. 2 issues would keep cropping up from now on. A lack of content and a lack of quality. New World would announce shortly after the Brimstone Sands update that they were changing to a seasonal model with a seasonal pass. Now this is normally referred to as a battle pass, and these seasons would change once every 3 months. And alongside the seasons, there would be actual content. In theory, this all sounded great, but they did start off on the wrong foot. There were delays to when Season 1 was supposed to start, and that meant the leaderboard kept getting pushed back, and this annoyed quite a lot of people because leaderboards were only introduced a couple of months before this. Obviously, delays are better than releasing broken things, nobody really denies that, but often, with or without a delay, things would end up broken anyway. Season 1, for example, had a major crafting bug. Some players lost their gear and it had to be restored. Season 2 brought some performance issues and season pass issues and seasonal story bugs and so on. Now, no game is perfect, but New World, if we're honest with ourselves, seems to have more bugs than other games. Now, maybe I'm biased here because I primarily play New World, but that's just the way that I feel about it. It feels slightly buggier than other MMOs in the genre. However, having said all of that, the first 2 seasons did include some new content. We had new dungeons, new seasonal story quests, new systems like gear sets and transmog, and we had our first proper raid. Well, it's not a classic raid in the sense that there's multiple bosses. No, the one that we had was one boss in an instance that you did with 20 people. This was the Sandworm. We did also have a seasonal 10-man trial, which was very interesting, and during this time things sort of felt okay. Not perfect, but okay. But they introduced this content, and the first raid was the season before we would get our first paid expansion, which meant that the raid sort of felt pointless, and even now it's not overly interesting to do as the rewards are quite limited. So the content that they added didn't really last that long and was often not permanent. The content in the seasons though were mostly passable. The quality, whilst not great, was sort of okay. And I think we all gave it a little bit of a pass because we knew that the expansion was looming around the corner. And New World's first expansion for me was a massive double-edged sword. It really lacked on content, but it fixed some horrible systems like the removal of Ward and Bane and some massive changes to crafting. New World's first expansion, The Rise of the Angry Earth, was formally revealed at the end of August, and it had a release date of the 3rd of October, which is quite a short window. The trailer happened to come on some random Thursday on YouTube. It was not revealed at Gamescom. It was not revealed anywhere prominently like that. It was just simply uploaded to YouTube and quietly released. The only marketing came from some of the MMO websites out there which had interviews with the devs. And when the expansion came, some Twitch streamers were paid to stream the game at launch. That was pretty much it for the marketing of the first proper paid expansion, which at the time I said was crazy, and I still think now is pretty crazy. But okay, so what? It was strangely revealed. What content did it have? Well, we had one reworked zone with an expanded MSQ, one new dungeon, one new weapon, PvP influence races, mounts, and a level cap increase, and not much else. Now sure, the artifact system is great and I like the rework to progression and crafting, but when I look at the gameplay I was doing before the expansion versus after, it's literally one new dungeon that I can play 1 week out of 5. I personally can't do the influence races due to the time that they're scheduled. I don't really use my mount that much because I'm playing instance-based content like Outpost Rush, Arena, and the dungeons. And I never really go to the Elysian Wilds, which was the reworked zone of First Light. They changed First Light with the intent of making it so that it was more used. And honestly, it's possibly even less used now than it ever was before. And if it's not, it sure feels that way. The key point is, I'm basically doing all of the same things, but I'm a slightly different level, and I'm using artifacts. Now, artifacts, by the way, are these special items that you acquire by doing all of the content that you have been previously doing in the past 2 years. They put a lot of them in the old dungeons. There were some that you found in the open world in the Elysian Wilds, but once you've got them, there's no real reason to go back. Now, all of that isn't that dissimilar to Brimstone Sands, which is why I sort of feel like Brimstone Sands was effectively a free expansion. Now, when I look back at the expansion now, I think it's quite good for anybody new to the game or anybody returning to the game who stopped playing early on, perhaps because of a lot of the issues that were around at launch. But it really didn't add that much for normal players who'd stuck with the game. And that's the key problem. Even after a full paid expansion, your normal login and play cycle is effectively the same as what it used to be. You're basically doing the same content, the same dungeons, the same Outpost Rush map, and the same arena. Although we actually have a new arena map that I think came in Season 2. And what's more, even the expansion had some huge core technical issues. The new expansion story was bugged, And as the devs had continued to refresh the leveling experience, which was definitely needed as we mentioned earlier, in doing so they completely broke the quest chain for some people, meaning that they couldn't get key things like heart rune abilities from the Brimstone update. I'm pretty sure that Shroud was having this issue when he was being paid to stream the game, which is never a good look. And not only could you not get the heart runes, you also couldn't get the Azov staff, a key item in the game which many players need for various activities. This frustration, I'm sure, led a lot of people to quit yet again. Now, New World is a buy-to-play game, so really, you buy the game with the anticipation that there will be some more content after the fact. And I do think that the value of the game from launch to the paid expansion was actually very good value. And I gladly bought the expansion with the belief that we will get good content moving forward. I do think that if we have a look at New World's expansion content, then objectively, the content is sort of rather limited. Because on the surface, if you look at New World's expansion content versus other games, it does not come out favourably. World of Warcraft often has around about 4 new zones, 8 dungeons, and a raid, and then you get content on top of it. Final Fantasy Endwalker, I think, had 3 new zones, 2 classes, 2 raids, 5 leveling dungeons, 3 endgame dungeons, and then a new PvP mode. Elder Scrolls Online, I think, had 2 new zones, 1 new class and a new raid. Guild Wars 2 End of Dragons had 5 new zones, new profession specialization, and I believe they add raids as the story goes on. Throne and Liberty is getting a new zone and a realm versus realm mode within the first 8 months of launch. Now, I know there's more nuance than that. For example, how long is the story content, how good are the system changes, etc. But overall, New World does not come out looking good in any of these comparisons. I know that the business model is different for pretty much most of these games, and I know that a lot of these games are using older tech, perhaps with less graphic fidelity. I know we aren't comparing like for like, but as a player, I have to ask myself, does that really matter to me when I just want to play and enjoy content? The point is, New World's expansion content for my taste is a little bit underwhelming. One thing that it does sort of well is that it keeps some of the older content relevant, but the old content can't remain as the main content you are expected to do after an expansion. That means that the content ends up feeling stale, and overall I think it's just unfortunate. So for me, the expansion was a little bit underwhelming, but then I sort of convinced myself that the expansion was just a bunch of much needed system changes and the lack of content would be addressed in Season 4 and beyond. Because let's be fair to the expansion, there were a lot of positive changes, which I'm not going to go into. A lot of positive system changes were actually very healthy for the game. It's also led to some other issues like casuals feeling like they don't have enough gold and stuff, but let's not really address that here. Let's just say there were some positive stuff in the expansion that I'm not going to go into. But the point is, I then thought that the content would come in Season 4 and beyond, and that didn't end up being the case. When we had the Season 4 dev update, the devs announced that a lot of the content that was supposed to come in Season 4 was actually being pushed into Season 5, maybe even beyond. Now, whilst I understand that a roadmap is definitely susceptible to change, for example, a roadmap that was revealed 10 months ago could obviously have alterations by the time it comes into reality. That's fine. The main problem is that not only did they delay that content, they didn't replace it with anything. Season 4 is rather barren, and it really doesn't capitalize on the momentum that it did have. The main things added in Season 4 was a seasonal story, a new dungeon, and a new season pass. And what's rather unfortunate is that they announced that because of the MSQ issues that they had in the expansion, that they would actually be slowing down to focus on quality. And then when Season 4 was released, we had some huge issues. The dungeon was simply disabled for a while, and it had a serious bug that meant that you cannot complete it. Not only that, the new season story quest was also disabled at a time. So at one point, you couldn't actually complete any of the limited content in the patch. On top of that, the server was also crashing every 20 minutes on day 1. Now, I won't go into this much, but what makes this worse is that these issues were reported on the PTR. The PTR is the test server, by the way, which they put up before the game goes live. Duke Sloth and his friends were reporting the dungeon crashes, and myself and a couple of others were reporting that we weren't able to do the seasonal story because the trials were disabled. Well, even after they claimed that it was enabled on the PTR, they never actually were enabled, and I know that because I tried. So we never tested it, and that issue made it into live. Now it might not be the same issue, but it sure feels like it. What's sort of strange about this is I actually do like the seasonal story. I think the season storytelling and the set pieces are getting much better. To the extent, I really wish they were actually just the main story and that this would lead into the MSQ in an expansion. But the big issue really isn't the quality of what we got, it's the fact that what we actually need is more repeatable endgame activities, and these activities should occasionally be refreshed. Now, I won't go into all of the game's issues in this video because quite simply the video would end up being probably like hours long, but the fact that we've had one main PvP battleground, Outpost Rush, and the fact that that battleground has not changed in 2 and a bit years is truly sad and very confusing. And as I said, I think New World can be summed up in 2 words: wasted potential. The potential of having a great action combat MMO is there, but the potential can never be hit because the content doesn't seem to come quickly enough. And if it does come, it has scuffed issues. Now, I don't know the cause of this. It could be the game's engine, which is a reworked CryEngine, now known as the Azov engine. It could be a developer lack of vision. It could be something from above at Amazon Game Studios. It could simply be that the game doesn't make enough money and it isn't being funded enough to make the game what we want it to be. They might just not have the resources. I do not know what the underlying issue is, and most players simply do not actually care. They just want content they can enjoy, and New World is almost there, but it has so much wasted potential. But you know what's actually truly crazy? The fact that I still believe that 2024 could be an amazing year for New World. I think the expansion was likely a financial success. We know that Amazon Game Studios and the same studio is making a Lord of the Rings MMO, so I think they're probably going to use New World as a technical testing ground for that game because that just makes sense. And I believe that this is one of the reasons that New World will probably find its way to console in 2024. It was also rumored that Virtuoso Games would be being used as an outsourced company to make a full expansion for the game. So it's possible that they are actually going to add the resources that we want and we need. It's possible that we will get the content that we want. But honestly, my confidence for this gets lower every patch and every update. The first downfall of New World was swift. The second downfall, I think, is just unfortunate. The game offers something that no other MMO offers on this scale. Truly amazing action combat, but it can't quite deliver on this potential. The game needs more content, and it needs more content that works. And if we don't see that, then New World will always remain as a game that had massive wasted potential. Big shout out to my Patreons. I really appreciate you guys. If you want to come and talk to me about anything, then come and follow me over on Twitch. For now, have a most beautiful day. Like and subscribe. Goodbye.